Hello again. Welcome to the 9 February 2018 edition of Portsmouth This Week. I'm your host, Doug Smith, and our special guest today is Senator Jim Seveney, District 11, which includes Bristol, Portsmouth, and Tiverton.
A little bit, yep.
Welcome back to the show, Jim. It's always good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Have you guys already begun the legislative session this year? Or?
Oh, yes. The sessions always begin on the first Tuesday in the new year.
Okay.
So we started, I think it was January 2nd. So we've been at it for almost 6 weeks now.
Okay. You sponsored a couple of bills which I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
I think both are very interesting. One of them is the I guess it's Senate 2025. That's the bill number.
Right.
Has to do with expanding drug awareness programs in high schools and trying to codify the funding or figure out where the funding can come from the state so the state can kick in. Can you discuss this bill and why you think it's needed?
Sure. This bill is all about getting funding streams to substance abuse prevention programs for kids in school. And it's primarily aimed at high school and middle school. Right now there is no money flowing to these programs other than the federal grant that comes in every year. There's existing law that's been around for quite a while now under Title 16 that says for every traffic violation conviction, on top of the fine, the traffic tribunal should be levying a $30 fee, and those fees are to go to the general fund for the purpose of supporting the Title 16 prevention programs. That hasn't been happening because there's a flaw in the law that needs to be fixed, and we're working to get that done. So right now none of that money is flowing, but that could amount to more than $1 million a year. The other portion of the bill addresses the fines associated with misdemeanor marijuana convictions. Half of all that money is supposed to flow to the prevention programs as well. And that's happening, but it's going into the general fund and nobody's quite sure where it's coming out. But it doesn't seem at this juncture to be moving to the prevention programs. So we're fixing that as well. And one of the principal things we're doing is the existing legislation doesn't specifically identify somebody that's responsible for doing this. So the change that we're working on is to make the Department of Hospitals and Behavioral Health Care responsible for that. BHDDH is the department. So they'll be identified in the law as the responsible agents to make sure this money is coming in and it's going to the right places.
So they would oversee
yes.
that the money from these fines and other things does do what it's supposed to do.
That's right.
I guess I'm kind of confused because you say the law is already in the books. What does that mean? I mean, I thought when you guys made laws, you made a law.
Yeah,
we started.
Well, we do. We don't always get it right, but in this particular case, this law when it first came out was when they in the late 90s when they established the traffic tribunal, and the law was set and everything was fine, but they updated the schedule of fines. I think that's in Title 32. I'm not sure, but they repealed the existing schedule of fines at the time and put a new one into law, but the numbers never got updated in the Title 16 law on the substance abuse prevention. So it doesn't refer to the right place in the law, so they can't collect the fees. This is what I've been told. I'm talking to the traffic tribunal as well, and we're trying to get all this straightened out so that we know that yes, you can collect the money and here's where it goes, here's who's responsible for it, and these are the programs it's going to support.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to do. So I'm working on the Senate side. Jay Edwards, Representative Edwards from Tiverton, is working on the House side with this.
Yeah. Well, this has got to be important because everybody understands the opioid crisis essentially that we're going through.
Right. Right.
And it's particularly troublesome in the schools. Even though the numbers are relatively low, I think it can be devastating to a community to have all this stuff happening. Our local organization, of course, is the Portsmouth Prevention Coalition.
Right,
And for some reason, I thought that they got state funding, but I guess it's just the state funneling federal funds?
It's the state funneling the federal funds through. Every year, the Substance Abuse Prevention Administration, SAMHSA is the acronym for it, they provide grant monies across the country. Rhode Island gets a little over $7 million a year. That comes to the state, and then the state is responsible for disseminating those funds to the various prevention activities. And that's really all the funding there is. I mean, there are no Rhode Island dollars. You as a taxpayer in Rhode Island, when you pay your state taxes, none of those dollars go to drug prevention or treatment.
Yeah.
Which is a problem, because the SAMHSA requirements for that federal grant are that those monies are a maintenance of effort on top of whatever the state is already doing.
Yeah.
And in our case, we're not doing very much.
Yeah.
So.
Well, our town does contribute money every year
Yes,
to the
yeah.
Prevention Coalition. So in that sense, some of our tax dollars on the
Well,
town level.
at the local level, yeah, the tax dollars are there, because the town does kick in a fair amount of money, $30,000 a year,
Yeah.
to support the local prevention coalition, which, these folks are doing wonderful work. They've got a paid professional and a large committee of volunteers who are out trying to spread the word in the schools, supporting programs. They were very involved in the planning and execution of Project Purple,
Yeah.
and then all the activities that went on at the schools this past week over that. They're very important. They're spread all over the state, and then they're all in the same fiscal condition. They're not getting very much money. It's very difficult to get the job done. The local communities have to kick in money because the state really isn't doing too much.
Yeah. We've had Ray Davis on
Yeah.
the program several times, and it's tough because they're trying to do, there's a lot more they need to do.
Yes.
And it's a never-ending problem. It's not like, okay, we fixed it, let's walk away. It isn't
Right.
going to be like that.
Well, we can see from what's going on around us that
Yeah.
we're in a tail chase with this problem,
Yeah.
and we're not catching up.
Well,
And I'm a firm believer that preventing it from happening in the first place by getting the kids when they're young and teaching them,
yeah,
and
education.
making them really understand and embrace the fact that this is bad stuff, it's bad for you, stay away from it. I think that's the only way we're going to ever get our arms around this. And
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking this on, because it sounds like a lot of these things, they sound so simple
yeah,
until you start getting into how you actually do it.
right.
And for example, before I get to the next one, what is the status now of your drug abuse bill?
Well, it's already been in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I don't think it's been heard yet on the House side. We have to do a fiscal note every time you introduce a bill that has implications on the budget or has fiscal impact. The governor's budget office will create a fiscal note to explain, okay, if this bill comes to law, here's what it's going to cost, and we did one last year, and there's a little bit of a cost impact, although I didn't really think so, because the traffic tribunal is collecting the marijuana fines and sending them to the general fund. The other stuff, like we discussed, the traffic fines, they're not collecting that because of the flaw in the existing law. So there's not a huge fiscal impact, but there is some, and everybody has to understand that as we move through the budget process.
Yeah.
And so that's ongoing. And so once that fiscal note gets back over to the General Assembly, should take a couple of weeks.
Okay.
We'll get right back to it.
So you hope to have this, voted upon and approved
Right.
during this
Right.
session?
I think once the fiscal note comes back, the Senate Judiciary, like they did last year, will probably transfer the bill to Senate Finance. I sit on Senate Finance, so that's okay
That's
with
good.
me, and then we'll get it moved to the floor. This did pass on the Senate floor last session. It just got hung up because of the fiscal implications, small that they might have been, but it got hung up over on the House side. Didn't make it to the floor.
You know, forgive me if I've ever said your job is not a rocket science, because apparently it is. It's very complex.
There are some details and there are some processes which sometimes make you scratch your head, but nah, I don't think it's rocket science.
Well, let me segue to the next one. E-recording.
Right.
You know,
right.
When I started looking at this, we're one of the few places in the country that doesn't do this already.
Right. There's like 44 states that have already done this. And what happened was, back in like 1999, the federal government passed an Electronic Documents Act, a law that basically said, hey, we will recognize the validity of an electronic document, an electronic signature, with the same view as, on paper, a physical document. But the language didn't really directly address important things that town clerks and municipalities have to deal with in terms of land evidence records, deeds, and property transfers, etc. So all this bill really does, and all the other ones that the other states have already passed, all this really does is make sure everyone understands that it's okay for those land evidence records as well. So all the transactions that involve the town clerk and official recording in the town repositories and all that stuff, that can be done electronically as well.
Okay, now, will there still be paper copies stored anywhere?
If you want paper copies, they'll keep everything they have, and if you want a paper copy, they'll do it that way as well.
Okay.
I mean, part of the impetus behind the bill is it saves everybody. Certainly, the person who needs this done, because lawyers don't have to go to town hall, and the meter's running when they're out trying to run down these documents and get them officially recorded and all that. And now they can do it through email and whatnot. So it'll be much easier for the town clerks, the city clerks, much easier for the lawyers, and less costly to get this stuff done by the people who are paying the fees for it.
Now, what is the status? Is that a bill?
Yes,
that's a bill you're putting forward?
That's a piece of legislation.
Okay.
It was just heard also in Senate Judiciary the other night, and there were actually two bills coming out of the Senate side. So we've skinnied that down to one bill. I've talked with the other sponsor, and that's going to go forward. So it'll come back up, and I fully expect that will be voted out of committee onto the Senate floor for a vote passage.
Yeah. That does seem like another kind of no-brainer that we should have to come into the modern age.
Yep.
Help everybody out. You also sponsored a bill that bans bump stocks and binary triggers.
Right.
And once again, it's one of these. Why do you think this is needed at our level? Why can't they fix it at the national level?
You and I were both in the military for a long, long time. Had you ever heard of these devices? I certainly haven't. And
No.
I touched almost every gun the Navy uses. And
I had to do some homework.
I don't know where these devices really came from, but I'd never heard of them until that horrific incident in Las Vegas. I mean, that's how that guy was shooting all those bullets so quickly. That seemed like he had machine guns. These were bump stocks, and they're pretty rudimentary devices, all of them. And all they do is figure out some way to use the mechanical action of shooting the rifle to continually depress the trigger much faster than you can just by pulling with your finger. And of course, the other result from that is it's very difficult to aim them. So in terms of shooting at discrete targets, they're pretty useless.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard of the binary triggers, or the trigger cranks. But these are also mechanical devices which allow you to increase the rate of fire on a semi-automatic weapon and make it seem like approach the rate of fire of a fully automatic, a machine gun. One of them I saw on YouTube. The guy timed it, and he was able to shoot 680 rounds a minute with one of those binary triggers.
Yeah.
So they're pretty horrific devices. I mean, you can put a large volume of fire out there. You don't know where it's going really.
Yeah.
But and there doesn't appear to be any use either in the sporting world.
Yeah, I can't understand why anybody or what anybody would want to have one of those for.
Well, I think we found out the hard way what one use is,
Yeah.
so anyway, hence, let's just ban them outright and just get rid of all of that stuff. Anything that increases the rate of fire beyond what's normal for a semi-automatic weapon, let's just ban them. So that's what the bill does.
Yeah. Now, we were talking before, Massachusetts has already done this, New Jersey's already
yes.
done this.
Massachusetts was first out of the gate. They added language banning bump stocks to their budget, which they were just getting ready to pass, and I think that happened either in November or early December.
Yeah.
So they were the first, and New Jersey was up next. In fact, we used some of the language from New Jersey's bill for ours.
Yeah.
So.
Just to kind of clarify for the audience here what a bump stock is, I had to look it up.
Yeah.
It's the stock of the rifle, that you hold against your
Yeah.
shoulder, and you're replacing the one that the gun came with
Right.
one of these bump stocks, so the thing actually slides back and forth real quickly using the recoil.
Right. Right.
And the binary trigger is something like that, only down at the trigger level.
Well, the binary trigger is you make a small change to the trigger mechanism so that you fire once when you depress the trigger and it fires again when you release.
Yeah.
And that allows you to, like I said, a high rate of fire by just continually pulling and releasing the trigger. The guy I was watching on YouTube got up to 680 rounds in 1 minute.
Yeah. Well, and you'd think that after the Las Vegas massacre and they found apparently 12 of these bump stocks equipped rifles.
Right.
So we could do this stuff, that the feds would take some action on this. One of the issues is, this is for Rhode Island, right?
Right.
But then there's nothing to prevent somebody from other states coming in. Would that be illegal for them if they
Yeah, you
enter
can't.
Rhode Island?
Yeah,
with one of these
you won't
things?
be able to transport it into Rhode Island.
Yeah.
It'll be illegal.
Okay.
But you're right. I mean, there are states where that aren't doing anything to ban them. In the federal government, Congress, they started hot, and it seemed like they were going to do something about it. But that effort over time has petered out a little bit, and I don't know why that is.
Yeah. Well, they haven't been able to do very much lately anyway.
Well,
but
yeah.
That does seem to be an opportunity for a federal fix that'd be fairly easy in terms of just redefining what an automatic weapon is, which are already illegal for civilians.
Right. And it would take action from the ATF too, because it was ATF regulations that established the constraints on having a fully automatic weapon, a machine gun. In fact, they don't make them anymore because I think the law that came out at the time, this was like in 1986, everything that existed up until that point was grandfathered, but nobody's making machine guns because no one can buy them.
Yeah.
So these devices are, they've found a chink in the law somehow, and we want to close that.
Well, again, I applaud you for doing that. It's sorely needed. It's too bad our legislator at the national level can't pick this up and run with it or do something with it.
Right.
I would hope they would, actually, because it's very important. And again, you always get somebody sneaking through, and you'll find these things, but the point is you've got to make it illegal.
Yes.
Now, what happens if you're in Rhode Island or you've already got one of these things for some reason in your gun? What does this law do to folks like that?
Well, they're going to have to either dispose of it or mail it to their cousin in some other state where it's legal, but they're going to have to get rid of it one way or another.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going. I started out thinking, well, I'll just turn them into the police station and all that, but the simpler way is leave it to any individual who owns one.
Yeah.
To figure out their own way to dispose of it, because it's going to come with a hefty fine and potential jail time if you're caught with one.
Yeah. Now, are you anticipating a lot of opposition to this up at the State House?
I don't. I don't know. I mean, no one from the NRA has approached me. I have been approached by a group called the Shooting Sports Foundation, and they represent not so much gun owners, but the gun manufacturing industry, guns and ammunition and things like that. And I mean, they're not against this. They said, look, we sort of stay in the background on all these issues related to weapons and whatnot. So we won't stand up either for it or against it. We just want to make sure that the language you're using is okay and not too broad that it impacts other legitimate gun use.
Sure.
So
now, what is the status of that bill?
It's been introduced in both the House and the Senate. On the House side, it's Representative Bob Craven, but they're not scheduled for hearings yet. So.
Okay. You anticipate this will be done during this?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Because there sort of is a sense of urgency here, I think.
I think so too.
You know, we had this minor. It was turned out to be a minor issue in the Portsmouth High School last week.
Right.
But it wasn't. It was an issue. It was something that could have turned much worse than it was.
Right.
And when it starts happening in little old Portsmouth, we really need to pay attention.
Well, we're finding that little old Portsmouth isn't that little old. I mean, we have the same issues with the drug problems,
Absolutely.
the substance abuse issues, violent acts, all that stuff. And
Yeah.
I think that the thing to do is as much preventative action as you can, so that when something like what happens at the high school, I mean, that happened in just a moment, and you want to be sure that the safety precautions are being put into place before those moments occur.
Yeah, and I think in that sense, since there really was no violence or no serious incident, this might have been a good wake-up call. Because I know the school department is taking this very seriously.
Oh yeah, in fact they're going to the town council, I think at the next meeting, to accelerate the use of the capital funds to enhance all the physical security infrastructure at the schools. So yeah, I mean they've certainly gotten the message.
Yeah.
So
just to kind of educate a little bit everybody that's watching, we talked about this before. One of the problems seems to be when you propose a new law, essentially.
Right.
Somebody's got to figure out how that impacts with the old laws and what applies, et cetera.
Right.
You were talking about a group that does this?
The State House employs a group of lawyers. It's called the Office of Legislative Counsel. And these lawyers, they're the ones who will take what the legislators want and make sure that it's not overlapping with existing law, make sure that it's not flat out in conflict with existing law, and they'll work with the legislator to make sure that it's correctly written, it's clean in terms of conflicts, and that it's legal.
Yeah.
So this is where a lot of times, if there's some sort of constitutional issue that might come up or anything like that, that gets discussed with the legislative counsel lawyers first, and they get all that stuff ironed out, and then the bill. That's when it goes to legislative counsel first, and when it comes out of there, that's when the bill gets a number and is formally introduced.
Yeah.
And from there, it goes back to the Senate and House leadership, and the leadership assigns it to a particular committee to be heard.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's worth, if anybody's interested in following up on this, is go on the web and search for this S-2025
right.
bill in the Rhode Island legislature. Take a look at the bill, take a look at the language, and you can see why this is kind of rocket science, it
Right,
seems to me.
right.
There's a lot of moving parts that have to be done, and it's complex.
Right.
And I'll give you one, I think, a good example of how complex it is.
Yeah.
What other bills are you going to be either forwarding, or sponsoring, or supporting?
Well, there's a number of them. One of them that popped up is kind of interesting. I got a letter from a woman who works in the homeless housing arena, and she wrote me because she's concerned. She's seen homeless folks that have a service dog, a service animal, turned away from the shelters, which I thought was odd because I thought the Americans with Disabilities Act covered this pretty comprehensively, and they do. But for whatever reason, some homeless people with a service animal are being turned away. So I introduced a bill just to get the dialogue going on what exactly the requirements are, and are there occasions when some homeless shelter, for whatever reason, maybe good reasons, people who have allergies, I don't know, can legitimately turn someone away because they have a service animal with them. So that hasn't been heard yet. It's been introduced, and it hasn't been scheduled for hearing. But I'm interested to see what comes of that. I've already been in touch with the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, and some of the other leaders of the Rhode Island housing issues.
It's an interesting issue.
Yeah.
We're almost running out of time here, which we usually do, but I just noted that the line item veto, the old line item veto, has been sent to for further study.
Right.
Give me a feeling that this thing is actually going to come up at some point.
This came up last session. The governor has been pushing for it. It came up last session, and the decision was made to put together a commission to look at it, because there's like 42 states that have already done this, but many of them have done it differently.
Yeah.
So this commission is looking at the different ways, trying to come up with what would be the best way.
Yeah, we talked about this the last time we were on
Right,
board.
right.
Too.
And so they're supposed to report out in April, and then I hope the General Assembly acts on it at that time. I am for it.
Yeah.
In fact, everyone in the Senate is for it.
Jim, thanks very much. We're out of time.
Okay.
And continue to do the good work up there.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we'll try to bring it back
Anytime.
later on down the road.
Anytime.
That's it for me, Doug Smith. We'll see you next time on Portsmouth This Week.